Hey all, in this video we're going to be taking a look at monopolistic competition. And so we're going to be looking at the graph, why it goes from short run to long run, and what happens when it goes from short run to long run, and also, is it efficient? So I apologize for the long video, but we have a lot of stuff to go over with monopolistic competition. So let's get started. Alright, so monopolistic competition. And so here, right, this is going to be the second of our three imperfect market structures. And so before we move on, we first have to talk about the characteristics. And so compared to monopolies and what we're going to cover after this video, oligopolies, monopolistic competition is sort of the most unique one. It's the most different. And so the reason why it's different is that A, they have a relatively large number of sellers, which is different than a monopoly, which is one firm that controls a vast amount of the industry, and then an oligopoly, where just a handful of firms control the vast amounts of industry. And so monopolistic competition, in a sense, is like perfect competition in that they have a relatively large number of sellers here. But unlike perfect competition, right, in monopolistic competition, each firm has a different size of the market share there, right? Perfect competition, all firms are roughly equal, the same size. In monopolistic competition, that is not the case. Some firms may be bigger, some firms may be smaller, but there's a relatively large number of firms / sellers in the market. They have differentiated products, so they sell different things that aren't easily substitutable. They have some control over price. So while monopolistically competitive firms are still price makers, they don't control the price to the same extent that a monopoly or an oligopoly does. Low barriers to entry. So this is another way that makes it unique within our imperfect market structures, right? With monopolies and with oligopolies, there are very high barriers to entry. However, with monopolistic competition, there are low barriers. You can enter and leave as you see fit. And because of that, there is a tremendous amount of advertising that goes on within monopolistic competition. And so here, right, we're going to skip this engagement slide because there's another slide that goes through it. But you should get the gist by now by going over our characteristics of monopolistic competition, that this specific market structure has both qualities that are monopolistic, that are like a monopoly, and they also have some qualities or characteristics that are like perfect competition. Hence, it's called monopolistic competition, a combination of a monopoly and perfect competition here. So what are the characteristics that make it like a monopoly? So what are the monopolistic qualities or characteristics here? One, they are price makers, right? They have some control over price due to their differentiated products. So the example of a monopolistically competitive market is going to be fast food companies, right? Fast food companies are monopolistic competition. They have control over their price because they all sell different goods, right? A Chick-fil-A sandwich is different than a Taco Bell taco, which is different than a McDouble from McDonald's. And so because of that, because each good is not perfectly substitutable, that they are differentiated, they all have control over price. And because they are price makers, our demand is greater than our marginal revenue, right? So in other words, right, the graph still looks the same, right? We still have a downward sloping demand curve, a downward sloping marginal revenue curve that are different from one another. There's also plenty of advertising. Because they have differentiated products, these firms need to advertise to bring in customers to them. And just like monopolies and just like oligopolies, monopolistically competitive firms are never efficient. So they're not efficient whatsoever. Well, then there are some competition qualities, right? There are some qualities that are like perfect competition here. A, there are a large number of smaller firms. However, each one of these firms can be different, have different shares of the market, right? Just like in fast food companies, some fast food companies are more popular and have a greater control over the market than other fast food companies, right? McDonald's has a larger share of the market compared to Jack in the Box or compared to Sonic. But like perfect competition, there is relatively easy entry and exit. There are low barriers to entry. So if one firm is making a loss, other firms are free to leave. If one firm is making a profit, other firms are free to enter. And just like perfect competition in the long run, there is zero economic profit. And the reason why in the long run with monopolistically competitive firms that there is no economic profit is because of this fact that there's low barriers to entry. Since firms can easily leave or enter into the market, they're going to leave and enter up to the point where no economic profit is being made. So in other words, there is a normal profit at the end of the day. So what I mean by differentiated product, because I've been using that term a lot, is that the goods are not identical, right? In other words, they are not perfectly substitutable. And we used this example earlier, right? A Taco Bell taco is not the same as a Whopper from Burger King, which is not the same as a number one, a chicken sandwich from Chick-fil-A, which is not the same as a Subway sub. Right? So these goods are not identical in any way, shape, or form. And so because they have unique goods, they try to capture a piece of the market, and they do so by using non-price competition. And what I mean by that, right? Non-price competition is just service location advertising. And then we could also say brand name packaging and stuff like that. In other words, non-price competition is what you do without just lowering or raising the price. And so especially with monopolistic competition, they advertise a whole bunch. The reason why firms advertise is because they want to increase the demand for their product and they want to make their demand more inelastic. Because once that demand becomes inelastic, the firms can raise their price and people are still going to consume or purchase their product there. And so here, right, this is an example of like monopolistic competition, also a little bit example of an oligopoly here, but a vast majority of the goods that are sold within the United States are controlled by a relatively few firms here. So this is actually pretty interesting if you just take a moment just to look at this chart here. Well, now that we described the characteristics of monopolistic competition, and we described in what ways are they like a monopoly, and what ways they are like perfect competition, let's draw it out. So, we said that they are price makers, which means our marginal revenue is less than demand. So, for broad strokes, right, it is the same graph as a monopoly making a profit or making a loss, right? In the long run, new firms are going to enter, so we're going to get to the point where the firm is not making any economic profit whatsoever. So let's look at it. So this is the graph for a monopoly, right? Which is also the same graph for monopolistic competition, which is the same graph for an oligopoly, which we're going to talk in 2 videos from now. And so real quick, is this firm making a profit or a loss? Well, we know that this firm is making a profit, right? Because here they're producing where MR equals MC, so they're going to be producing QE, and then we're going to go up to the demand curve, which remember equals our price. And so PE represents the price that the firm is going to sell their product at. It intersects the ATC right here. So this area right here represents the area of profit. Well, and then here, right, there's a much nicer drawn one. And so here, if this firm is making a profit, what are other firms going to do? And in this sense, it's like perfect competition, right? If this firm is making a profit and there are low barriers to entry, well, other firms are going to enter into the market. And so here, it is important to note, right, that firms are going to enter until there is no economic profit whatsoever. And so what is going to shift? Well, it's our demand curve and our marginal revenue curve that is going to shift here. So if this firm is making a profit, more firms are going to enter, which is going to decrease the demand for the firms existing within the market already. So in other words, our demand curve is going to shift down, right? Which our demand shifts, so our marginal revenue curve is also going to shift, right? So pretend like I drew marginal revenue. I didn't really do a good job of that. But our demand and marginal revenue curve both shift until no economic profit is being made. And so let's clean this up, right? So it looks like this. So firms are going to enter into the market until there is no economic profit. So in other words, our price and quantity falls and total revenue is going to equal total cost here. So if you look at this graph, right, this is our new demand and our new marginal revenue curve after it shifted. We're still going to produce where MR equals MC. That didn't change. We're still going to go up to demand, which yet again equals our price. So that's our equilibrium price. But if you notice, right, the price and the ATC, and where it hits the ATC, is the same thing. So because of that, right, our total revenue equals our total cost, which indicates a normal profit. And remember, a normal profit is the same thing as no economic profit here. So in the long run, for perfect competition, right, there is no economic profit. That our demand and marginal revenue curve are going to shift to the left or shift to the right up to the point where total revenue equals total cost here. One important thing to note here, if you notice, it is still not productively efficient. And this is where a lot of students tend to get confused. So I'm going to do this in red here. The minimum point of the ATC is right here, where the marginal cost, right? So right here, where the marginal cost intersects at the minimum point of the ATC. If you notice, the firm is still not producing at the lowest point of the ATC, right? They're producing somewhere along this downward sloping portion of the ATC here. So yes, firms are going to produce until there's no economic profit, but that does not mean that they are productively efficient. They are not producing where price equals the minimum of the ATC. And so this is long-run equilibrium here. Right. So why does demand shift? Well, when short-run profits are being made. So in other words, right, when our graph, yet again, please label, right, but not labeling for sake of this, right? So when our graph looks like this, right, there's profit being made. Well, other firms now has an incentive to enter into the market. Well, what does that do to our demand and marginal revenue for the firms already existing within the market itself? Well, that means, right, for the demand for each individual firm in the market is going to fall because now there's more competition. And so our demand and marginal revenue falls up until the point where there is no economic profit being made. Well, when short-run losses are being made, yet again, so when the graph looks like this, right? So when short-run losses are being made, what happens? Well, firms are going to exit, right? If one firm is making a loss, it incentivizes other firms to leave the market. So the result is that there are less substitutes and more market shares for the firms that remain in the market. So the demand for each and every single one of the firms that stayed in the market is going to increase. And so that is why our demand curve is going to increase, right, up until the point where there is no economic profit being made, right, where there's a normal profit here. All right, so what we are going to do is we're going to do this guided practice together. So here, the next slide has a monopolistically competitive firm making a loss. So what I want you guys to do right now is on a separate sheet of paper, draw a monopolistically competitive firm making a loss. And then we are going to shift everything and explain how the graph goes from short-run losses to long-run equilibrium and what that actually looks like on our graph itself. So here, this is what the graph should look like, right? This is a firm making a loss in monopolistic competition. And so what happens? Well, this firm is making a loss, so that incentivizes other firms to leave the market. When other firms leave the market, what happens is that the demand and the marginal revenue for firms that stayed in the market, so the existing firms, their demand is going to increase because now there's less firms to compete with. There are less substitutes. And so when that happens, right, our demand curve is going to shift to the right, or increase, right, and our marginal revenue curve is also going to do the same exact thing. And so now, right, we're going to produce where MR equals MC. So this becomes our new quantity. This becomes our new price. And then if you notice, the total revenue equals total cost, meaning there's a normal profit or there's no economic profit being made. And so the last thing that I want to go over is, are monopolistically competitive firms efficient? The easy answer is no. Well, why? Well, they are not allocatively efficient. Remember, allocatively efficient means price equals marginal cost, right? So here, MR equals MC, our price is up here, so price does not equal marginal cost here. They are also not productively efficient, right? Because productively efficient is price equals the minimum of the ATC. In long run, yes, they're not going to be making any economic profit. However, this right here is the productively efficient point. And so if you notice, they're not producing at that productively efficient point. They're still producing where MR equals MC in the long run. And so because of that, in the long run and also in the short run, monopolistically competitive firms are never efficient. So they are never allocatively efficient and they are never productively efficient, much like a monopoly and much like an oligopoly when we get to it. Right? And so there's a reason why these firms are called imperfect market structures, is that they're never efficient whatsoever. The last thing is the idea of excess capacity. So given the current resources, the firm can produce at this lowest point, but they choose not to because they're maximizing profit at this MR equals MC point. So this gap right here in yellow represents the excess capacity. They can be producing at the lowest cost. However, they choose not to because they will make much more profit by producing at the MR equals MC point, the profit maximizing point there. All right, so that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys learned a lot, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.